about Rich Dad and his lessons. She had been a business major in college and was very interested in Rich Dad's BI triangle and the process of becoming an entrepreneur. Sitting on the sand at the water's edge in the moonlight, talking to the most beautiful woman I had ever known about business was like being in heaven. Most of the women the disco duck had dated up to this point were not into business. Kim was. She was very interested. She shook her head when I told her the story of the nylon wallet business. I told her about flying high, and then the crash that followed. I told her about the kids in Asia, one stacked on top of another, 4 tiers of workers where there should only be 1 tier, inhaling toxic fumes from the paints we used. She nearly cried. Then I told her about resigning from my company because the mission was over. With that, she took over the conversation saying, "I'm glad you're moving on, but what are you going to do?" Shaking my head, I replied, "I don't know. All I know is that sometimes you have to stop before you can begin again. So right now, all I am doing is stopping." At that point, I told her about my dad who was still unemployed, taking odd jobs when he could find them. I told her about how I thought education was inadequate and not preparing kids for the real world, how schools were preparing kids to be employees, not entrepreneurs, teaching kids to expect a company or the government to take care of them once their working days were over. We then discussed the future, how Rich Dad envisioned a coming Social Security crisis, a medical crisis, and a financial crisis in the stock market, growing bigger and bigger as the baby boom generation aged. "Why are you concerned?" she asked. "Why do you think the coming financial crisis is your problem?" "I can't really say," I said. "I know that the world has a lot of problems. Problems with the environment, diseases, enough food, shelter, and so on. But for me, this problem of money, poverty, and the gap between rich and poor interests me the most. I feel it in my stomach and in my heart." The conversation shifted to Dr. Buckminster Fuller and my studies with him and how he shared the same concerns about the financial system as my rich dad. I did my best to explain to her how Dr. Fuller said the rich and powerful were playing games with money, keeping the poor and middle class constantly at the edge of financial crisis. I also told Kim about Fuller's saying that each of us had a purpose to our lives, that each of us held a vital piece of the puzzle, and our job was not just to make money, but also to make this world a better place. "It sounds like you're looking for a way to help people like your dad and people like those kids in the factory," said Kim. I said, "That is pretty accurate. While I was in that factory, I decided it was time for me to work for the kids instead of having the kids working for me. It is time for me to make the kids rich, rather than just myself rich." The sun was breaking over the ocean. The young surfers were out testing the smooth, glassy waves. It was time to get ready for work. We had been up all night, but were full of energy. We have been together ever since. Finding my passion. In December 1984, Kim and I moved to California. As I have stated many times in my writings, this began the hardest period of both of our lives. The business opportunity we thought we were part of did not pan out. That left us without money, sleeping in our car for a few nights. It was a time that tested our commitment to our new business and to each other. California was the hotbed for new models of education. Many of the hippies had grown older and were teaching seminars on some very strange and interesting subjects. The common themes were open your mind, change your paradigms, and break through your limiting realities. Kim and I attended as many seminars as we could, gaining new ideas and observing different teaching techniques. Earlier in this book, I wrote about attending Bob Bondurant's School of High Performance Driving, and also about working with Tony Robbins and teaching people to walk across 2,000-degree coals. As you may already know, I do not like the traditional system of education. I didn't like being taught by the fear of failing, learning to memorize all the right answers, and being afraid of making mistakes. In school, I always felt I was being programmed to do only the right things and to live in fear of living life. In school, I often felt like a butterfly caught in a spider's web, with the spider wrapping its web around and around me until I could no longer fly. The kind of education I was looking for was an education that taught people how to break through their fears, education that would help them discover their own power within so they could walk on fire or drive a high-speed Formula One racer. The more I studied these techniques and how we learn, how the mind works with our emotions, and how the mind affects our physical abilities, the more I wanted to learn. I became fascinated by the subject of how we as humans learn. I discovered why I loved the Marine Corps so much. I loved Marine Corps training and flight school because it too was about going beyond fears and limiting thoughts. The Marine Corps was the perfect learning environment for me. The learning environment was tough and rigorous, requiring my body, mind, emotions, and soul to get through the programs. In the Marine Corps, memorizing the right answers is not enough. Just as in the world of business, the Marine Corps is about results, not reasons. It is about actions, not words. It is a learning environment that insists that the mission be first, the team second, and the individual last. It is a learning environment that taught me to fly rather than a learning environment that clipped my wings. Breakthrough learning. It was dawning on me that what we were studying was what I came to call breakthrough learning, the type of learning that is powerful enough to cause a transformation, a paradigm shift of reality, much like how a chick must feel when it finally breaks through the shell of the egg. During one of the learning seminars I attended, I learned about Ilya Prigogine, a person who was awarded the Nobel Prize for his research on dissipative structures. To put it into as simple an example as possible, his research proved why a child will climb on a bike, fall off, climb on, fall off, and then suddenly be able to ride. Again, in the simplest of terms, under the extreme stress of falling down and getting up again and again, the stress of the process causes the child's brain to reorder. The brain goes from not knowing how to ride a bicycle to being able to ride a bicycle forever. To me, his research verified why people who do well in school may not do well in the real world. There are many people who know what to do, but cannot do what they know. Like my dad, once they fall down, they stay down and say, "I'll never do that again." Instead of pressing on with increasing stress and frustration, they back off to reduce the stress. In many ways, it is like the chick remaining in its protective shell. As Prigogine summarized, stress is the way intelligence grows, or, as Rich Dad would say, stay with the process. How fast can we learn? Another person whose work I researched was Georgy Lozanov of Bulgaria, the pioneer of what is now called superlearning. Although I never took one of his classes, it is reported that he was able to teach people a complete language in 1 or 2 days. Obviously, traditional academics discredit him and his work. I began experimenting with his techniques and found out that they really do work. One reason I disliked school so much was simply that the pace was too slow. It took too long to learn too little. Combining different teaching techniques increased the speed of learning, reduced boredom, and resulted in greater long-term retention. I began to become excited about education. What I liked most about what I was discovering was that it did not matter if you were an A student or an F student. With this method of teaching, all it took to learn was the desire to learn. Finding my passion. Rich Dad had said to me years earlier that once you complete a process, you take the best with you and leave the rest behind. You then move on to the next process. As Kim and I were going through this learning period, Rich Dad's words began to make sense. Suddenly, it dawned on me that I was beginning the best of several processes in my life. I had my experience from the process of going to school, which I really hated. Next were my experiences from the process of being a Marine pilot. Then I had my experiences from learning to be an entrepreneur with my nylon wallet business. As tough as that nylon wallet process was, I did have many great experiences to take with me. And now, actually becoming a student of how people learn, all my past experiences were coming together. My often disorderly life was beginning to make sense. Around August 1985, I found my passion. My next business was forming in my mind. From 1986 to 1994, Kim and I ran an organization that offered the Business School for Entrepreneurs and the Business School for Investors. Instead of your traditional business school, this business school had no prerequisites. We did not require scholastic records. All that was required was the will to learn and the time and money for the courses. Employing the techniques we had learned, we were able to teach people the basics of accounting and investing, normally a 6-month course, in one day. Instead of talking about business, the class actually built a business touching on all parts of the BI triangle. Instead of talking about team building, each business team had to train for a triathlon. Instead of one person finishing first, it was the team that finished first that won. I do not know if you know how hard it is to get 15 people of different ages,